In an exceptionally poignant scene, the iconic actor Jack Nicholson was moved to tears following an unforeseen tribute from President Ibrahim Traoré, renowned for his unflappable and self-assured persona. Nicholson was utterly unprepared for the profound emotional weight of Traoré's remarks. The sincere address caught both him and the entire room by surprise. This recording documents Nicholson's seldom-seen vulnerability and the homage that rendered everyone speechless. Forging a powerful link across generations and continents, the studio's illumination was intense, yet Jack Nicholson remained uncharacteristically motionless. Celebrated for his roguish smile and legendary composure, he now appeared conspicuously unsettled. The program was scheduled as a standard affair, an homage to cinematic giants, but nobody foresaw that President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso would make an appearance as a guest speaker. The young head of state entered with a serene resolve, his very presence commanding the space. Jack repositioned his signature sunglasses, a faint smile playing on his lips as the audience applauded. He was a man who had experienced it all: celebrity, wealth, and endless ovations. Nothing could faze him anymore, or so he believed. Then, Traoré's gaze met his. There was no teleprompter, no prepared speech, just an initial quietness. Nicholson felt a sudden shiver, a deep-seated sensation he hadn't encountered in many years. Mr. Nicholson, Traoré commenced in a soft tone. This evening is not about your celebrity. It is about your soul, the part of your being that the public rarely glimpses. The room hushed. The cameras moved in for a close-up. Nicholson gulped, his famous grin dissolving. For the first time, in what felt like a lifetime, he doubted his ability to maintain his composure. Traoré spoke with a gentle power that held the entire auditorium captive. "You have gifted the world with indelible narratives," he stated, his accent rich and unwavering. "But I wish to talk about the individual behind the characters, the one who bore his own suffering yet continued to bring delight to millions." Nicholson blinked quickly, as if repelling an emotion he did not want the cameras to capture. The audience members leaned in, sensing a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Traoré went on, "When my nation endures hardship, I tell my citizens, even the most resilient among us must grant themselves permission to feel. You showed us this, not with dialogue, but with your very soul on the silver screen." The air grew thick with emotion. Behind the cameras, crew members discreetly dabbed at their eyes. Nicholson let out a slow breath, his hands shaking where they rested on his chair. He attempted to form a word, but his throat constricted. Traoré did not hurry him. He simply laid a hand on his own heart and declared, "Tonight, I pay tribute. To you, not the icon, but the human being." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Nicholson's lips began to tremble. His confident smile was nowhere to be seen. The moment stretched on in a heavy, unbreakable silence. The spectators could practically hear the thumping of Nicholson's heart. He bent forward, placing his hands on his knees, his posture laden with a sudden weight. His renowned self-possession had evaporated, revealing a man stripped of all his defenses. Nicholson began, but his voice fractured. He stopped, trying to compose himself, but the wave of emotion was too strong to be suppressed. A single tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek, a spectacle nobody in that room had ever anticipated. Soft gasps rippled through the crowd, yet everyone remained frozen in place. Traoré gave a gentle nod, his gaze kind and resolute. "It is okay, Jack. The most powerful hearts are those that understand when it is time to feel." That single tear was soon joined by a second, then a third, and Nicholson bowed his head, no longer able to conceal them. For this one moment, the man who had always seemed untouchable was simply human, exposed, and achingly real. The cameras recorded every second. It was a moment the world would hold in its memory. And this was merely the start. The studio lights seemed to have softened, though no adjustments had been made. Every eye was locked on Nicholson, whose silence now felt more significant than any monologue he had ever delivered. He eventually raised his head, his eyes glistening, and murmured, "Why? Why have you chosen me?" Traoré shifted forward slightly, his tranquil voice resonating through the room, because society so often forgets that legends are still mortals, and at times, those who have given us strength must be reminded of their own. Nicholson blinked, his mouth parting as if to reply, but he was bereft of words. "For a man famous, For his quick wit, this was a completely new experience, a role for which he had no script. The audience was held in a state of awe, their breathing shallow. Even the camera operators seemed to hesitate, reluctant to intrude on the raw purity of the scene. Nicholson passed a trembling hand over his face, as if brushing away something more profound than tears. Traoré's words were not merely kind, they were incisive truths that he hadn't realized he so desperately needed to confront. And for the first time in decades, Jack Nicholson truly felt seen. Traoré's voice held a warmth that appeared to penetrate to the core of Nicholson's spirit. "You have demonstrated courage for us," Traoré stated softly, "but I am aware that courage is often born from pain. You shouldered it so that the rest of the world could retain its belief and hope." Nicholson's gaze fell, and suddenly, a torrent of memories was unleashed. Nights filled with loneliness despite the fame, personal losses he had long since buried, times when the roar of the crowd failed to quiet the silence of a vacant hotel room. He swallowed with difficulty, his hands now tightly interlaced. Pressed on, "My people see men like you and think that greatness is beyond reach. But I want them to understand that even the most accomplished have their scars. That is what lends authenticity to their journeys." The words struck Nicholson with an undeniable force. He felt the emotional weight of his entire life pressing down on him. But paradoxically, he also felt a sense of release. Someone, at last, comprehended. A solitary tear coursed down his cheek. This time, he made no effort to wipe it away. He allowed the world to witness it. The audience was completely still. Not a single cough or rustle of movement. Even the audio technicians sat motionless, their equipment momentarily forgotten. Nicholson finally recovered his voice, which was low and shaky. "You have no real knowledge of me, and yet it feels as though you do." Traoré offered a gentle smile. "I do not need to know the details of your life to recognize your soul. There are times when the eyes communicate what language never can." The two men, divided by continents, generations, and vastly different life experiences, sat regarding each other as if they were old companions. Nicholson took a deep, shuddering breath, his usual defenses now completely dismantled. "I believed I was beyond this kind of feeling," he confessed, "but you have reminded me that I am still human." Traoré leaned in, "And that is your most profound offering to all of us. Not your celebrity, but your humanity." The room filled with the quiet sounds of weeping. Even those viewing the broadcast from thousands of miles away would later confess to shedding tears at this precise moment. Nicholson's eyes shone with moisture again, but this time his tears seemed to carry something more than just sorrow. They carried gratitude. Nicholson leaned back, his breathing labored, his typically piercing eyes now clouded with emotion. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the lines etched on his face, which now seemed less like signs of age and more like the marks of a long, arduous journey. Traoré paused, allowing the silence to have its own voice. Then, he said gently, "Mr. Nicholson, millions of people drew strength from the fortitude you displayed on screen. But today, I want to celebrate the man who exists behind the myth." The words hit their mark with an accuracy Nicholson couldn't evade. His lips trembled as he fought to maintain his composure, but it was a battle he had already lost. He dropped his gaze as his eyes welled up. In the audience, some people covered their mouths, astounded to see a figure of such invincibility reduced to such raw vulnerability. Nicholson whispered, almost inaudibly, "I thought I had no more tears left to cry." Traoré leaned in with compassion. "Sometimes, tears are not a sign of weakness, but evidence that you have lived a full life." A tear rolled unimpeded down Nick's cheek, and on this occasion he did not try to stop it. The room, thick with shared feeling, seemed to inhale and exhale along with him. For a moment, Nicholson gazed at his quivering hands as if contemplating his next words. Then, his gravelly voice finally broke the stillness. "I've spent my entire life pretending everything was all right," he admitted. "The fame, the applause, it can fill a space, but it can't fill your heart." The confession sent a shockwave through the room. This was Jack Nicholson, the unassailable titan of Hollywood, acknowledging his own emptiness. Traoré nodded with understanding. "And yet, by admitting it, you have granted millions the bravery to acknowledge their own." Nicholson looked up, his eyes meeting Traoré's. The young president's serene demeanor sparked a feeling he hadn't known for years. "Trust, you are younger than my own grandchildren," Nicholson said, a shaky laugh escaping him. "Yet you speak with the wisdom of a man who has lived a century." Traoré smiled faintly. "I have witnessed the suffering of my people. It compels you to cherish truth above comfort." The room fell silent once more, but this time the silence wasn't oppressive. It felt sacred. Nicholson breathed in deeply. "You have no idea what you have done for me today." The moment was too profound to be contained. A person in the audience started a slow, soft clap, and within moments, the entire studio was on its feet. The ovation was deafening, yet it possessed an unusual quality of respect. It wasn't the kind of applause for a performance, but for an honest human truth. Nicholson's eyes widened in disbelief. He shook his head slightly, murmuring, "No, I'm not worthy of this." Traoré placed a hand reassuringly on the table that separated them. "You are not for an image of perfection, but for the courage of being real." The cameras captured Nicholson in his rare state of defenselessness. The tough guy, the Hollywood icon, sitting with tears streaming freely down his cheeks as the world applauded his humanity. In that instant, viewers watching live around the globe felt a connection not just to Nicholson or Traoré, but to their own concealed vulnerabilities. Nicholson eventually rose to his feet, wiped his face, and offered a small, humble nod to the crowd. His voice broke as he uttered a simple "thank you," and though he spoke no further, the ensuing silence conveyed everything as the applause eventually subsided. The host leaned toward him, her voice quiet but trembling with emotion. "Mr. Nicholson," she inquired softly, "what are you feeling at?" This moment, Nicholson drew a shaky breath, his gaze shifting from the host to his voice was raw and cracked as he replied, "I feel ... seen, for the first time in a very, very long time." The statement struck the audience with the force of lightning. People watching from their homes later said they were frozen, afraid to even move. Traoré remained silent, simply nodding with a look of compassion seldom seen in the world of politics. Nicholson continued, "I spent so many years believing that being tough meant never letting anyone see you cry. But perhaps true strength is this." He gestured toward the tears that still glistened on his face. The room was hushed again. The audience was no longer watching a celebrity. They were witnessing a man reconnecting with his own soul. When it was his turn to speak once more, Traoré leaned in, his voice unwavering but laden with feeling. "Mr. Nicholson," he began, "in my homeland, many men are also told not to show their tears. But I say to them, a dry eye can conceal a shattered heart." A collective shiver went through the room at the gravity of his words. Nicholson's eyes remained fixed on him, as if those words were meant for him alone. Traoré went on, "I have seen mothers grieve for their children, and children for their fathers. They weep not from weakness, but because their love is more powerful than their silence." Nicholson's lips trembled anew as he whispered, "You're teaching me a lesson I should have learned a lifetime ago." Traoré offered a faint smile. "It is never too late to learn the truth, and it is never too late to begin to heal." The audience was completely captivated. There was no coughing, no shuffling, only an absolute stillness broken by the sound of Nicholson's quiet exhale, as if an immense weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. Then a moment occurred that no one could have predicted. Nicholson slowly got up from his chair. His hands were unsteady, but his movements were filled with a new resolve. Traoré also rose, instinctively moving to meet him. Without a single word, Nicholson pulled the president into a tight, powerful embrace. The crowd gasped, then immediately fell quiet as the cameras zoomed in. Nicholson's voice cracked as he whispered into Traoré's ear, the microphones just barely picking up his words. "Thank you for giving me a part of myself back." Traoré's hand patted his back reassuringly. "No, thank you for showing the world that even legends are allowed to feel." Tears now streamed down Nicholson's face, unashamed and unconcealed. The deeply affected audience rose to its feet once more in a standing ovation, many dabbing at their own eyes. In that embrace, 2 generations, 2 continents, and 2 profoundly different lives connected in the most fundamental human way through truth, vulnerability, and love. The moment was destined to be eternal. The hug lasted longer than anyone anticipated. When Nicholson finally pulled away, his face was wet, but his eyes held a new light that wasn't there before. The host, visibly emotional herself, paused before asking President Traoré, "What prompted you to deliver this tribute today?" Traoré surveyed the studio, his gaze returning to Nicholson. "Because the world needs to witness that dignity and humanity are not contingent on age, wealth, or celebrity. They depend on the courage to feel." Nicholson lowered his head, fighting to steady his breath. The audience was transfixed. You could almost sense the collective sound of hearts, both breaking and mending, in living rooms all over the planet. People were perched on the edge of their seats, some murmuring quietly, others already wiping away their own tears. Nicholson finally lifted his head, his voice fractured. "You've reminded me of something I lost amidst the noise of my career, and I will never, ever forget this moment." The studio erupted in applause again, though many clapped through their own tears. Then Traoré did something unexpected. He shared a personal story. "When I was a young boy," he started softly, "my father would walk 4 miles each day, simply to provide food for our family. He had calloused hands and weary eyes. But when he held me, I felt safer than anywhere else in the world." Nicholson's expression softened, his gaze locked on Traoré, as if each word was drawing him into his own past. "One evening," Traoré continued, "he said to me, 'Son, strength is not measured by how fiercely you can fight, but by how much love you can hold in your heart.' He passed away not long after that, but his words constructed the man I am today." Nicholson's lips trembled. He whispered, "My own father. He told me almost the exact same thing. But I was too young, too full of pride to comprehend it then." The audience was mesmerized. Strangers were holding hands. Even the camera operators were seen wiping their eyes, struggling to maintain their focus. This was no longer an interview. It was a shared confession of love, loss, and wisdom passed across generations. Nicholson leaned forward, his voice breaking as he spoke. "You know, I have portrayed many characters in my life. Mobsters, fighters, men who never shed a tear. But at this moment, I feel more human than I ever did in any of those roles." Traoré placed a hand on Nicholson's shoulder. "That is because you are not playing a character now. You are being your true self, and that represents the greatest courage of all." The audience gasped softly, not from shock, but because the truth of the statement resonated in every heart in the room. Nicholson shut his eyes, and another tear rolled down his cheek. "I wish my father could have seen me like this, just as his son, not as some untouchable figure." Traoré's voice was calm, yet it carried the weight of profound sincerity. "He does see you, and tonight the entire world sees you too." At that moment, a reverent quiet descended upon the studio. The very air felt charged, as if time itself had paused to honor the raw honesty that was unfolding. For the first time in decades, Jack Nicholson was not just a Hollywood icon. He was a man vulnerable, broken, and yet beautifully complete. The lights in the studio seemed to possess a softer glow now, as if they too were touched by the events that had transpired. Jack Nicholson, the man typically defined by his unshakable grin, sat in silence, his hands trembling faintly. Traoré leaned in with gentle reassurance. "Mr. Nicholson, you have given the world an immense gift tonight. Allow the world to offer something in return. The reminder that you are loved, not for the characters you embodied, but for the life you have lived." Nicholson X. A shaky breath that made his chest rise and fall as if he were bearing the weight of his entire life. He tried to speak, but his lips quivered. In place of words, he reached out and grasped Traoré's hand with a firm grip. The audience erupted in applause, though many clapped with tear-stained faces. Viewers at home felt as if they were participating in something far greater than a television program's, something profoundly human. For once, Nicholson made no attempt to hide his emotions. He wiped his tears openly, allowing everyone to see him as simply a man, fragile, thankful, and deeply moved. The applause eventually faded into a quiet so profound it seemed to reverberate. Traoré did not press him to speak, but simply allowed Nicholson the space to compose himself. The two men from vastly different worlds sat together, side by side, like old friends. Finally, Nicholson whispered, "You remind me of my father." He always believed in people, even when the rest of the world had given up. Traoré nodded slowly. Then his spirit is very much alive within you. Tonight is proof of that. A woman in the audience suddenly rose and began to clap again, her voice breaking as she shouted, "Thank you." Soon, the entire studio was on its feet. Nicholson covered his mouth with his hand. Overwhelmed, Traoré bowed his head in a gesture of humility, but his eyes shone with an inner strength. Those watching from home, from America to Africa, from Europe to Asia, shared in the silence that ensued. It was not an awkward silence. It was sacred, filled with gratitude, respect, and the mutual understanding that our humanity is most powerful when our hearts are open. Nicholson whispered again, his voice barely audible, "I will never forget this night." As the program drew to a conclusion, the host at last spoke. "Tonight, we have witnessed something more than an interview. We have witnessed truth." Nicholson turned to Traoré, his voice finally steady. "You have given me a priceless gift. Hope, and the reminder that love, respect, and courage are timeless." Traoré smiled gently. "And you, sir, have given the world an example of humility and grace that will be a gift for future generations to cherish." The two men embraced one final time. The audience wept without restraint, some whispering prayers, others clutching the hands of strangers. Across the planet, countless viewers sat before their screens, speechless, with tears streaming down their faces. As the camera pulled back for a wide shot, Nicholson looked directly into the lens, his voice breaking one last time as he said, "Never be afraid to feel. It is the most courageous thing any of us can do." The screen faded to black, but the moment remained alive in millions of hearts. My dear viewers, if this account resonated with you, do not depart in silence. Please give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, and most importantly, share your own reflections in the comments section. Let us know how this moment impacted you. Your voice is valued here, and together we can continue to propagate love, hope, and our shared humanity.